Dear colleagues, thank you for waiting. And now, Colonel Andriy Lysenko, the spokesman for the Information and Analytical Center of the Council for National Security and
the National Security and Defense Council Information Center spokesman, with the latest update from ATO zone. Proszę, pan Andriy.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Yesterday, on the territories of some districts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, temporarily controlled by the terrorists from the so-called DNR and LNR, the so-called elections of leading bodies of these organizations took place. The Security Service of Ukraine launched a criminal proceeding according to the signs of the crime stipulated by Part 1, Article 109 of Criminal Code of Ukraine. The actions aimed at the violent change or subversion of the constitutional order. The process of the so-called voting had all the signs of the settled action for Russian mass media in order to imitate the high participation of citizens in districts of Donetsk region controlled by the militants. They have decreased the number of polling stations 3 times, and in Luhansk for 7 times. The people were stimulated by the sale of cheap vegetables and handing out the so-called social cards. After this, even residents of Donetsk and Luhansk started to call the leaders of DNR and LNR the vegetable junta. In order to provide for the mass participation in the process of voting under the disguise of peaceful residents, the military personnel of the armed forces of Russia took part. The figures of voting don't have any sense because everybody could vote, and the voting also took place in Russia, and the bulletins were printed on usual printers, and 3 days before the voting it started in the internet. The voters were intimidated with arms, and armed militants were at every polling station. They have been disseminating the information that everybody who would not come to vote would be declared unloyal persons who will be sent to court at in the town of Snizhny, because the the attendance was very, very low. The terrorists came on their tanks to residential blocks of flats and threatened to open fire in order to make people to take part in the vote. And in the town of Rovinki, local teachers and doctors wanted to go on strike in order not to take part in the elections, so-called elections, but terrorists gathered them and started to threaten with the arms. In 8 cities of Ukraine, the residents of Donbas who were made to leave their homes because of the danger created by the militants held the actions of protest against the so-called elections. President Poroshenko said that the so-called elections in the occupied districts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions violate brutally the Minsk agreements. The farce under the muzzles of tanks and submachine guns organized by 2 terrorist organizations on the part of Donbass is an awful event that has nothing in common with real expression of will, the president of Ukraine said. The head of the state said that even now the leading countries of the world and influential international organizations have condemned those pseudo-elections. The Minsk protocol provides for the conducting in some districts of Donbass of early local elections only on the basis of Ukraine's laws. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine said that not a single authoritative international organization and not a single democratic state of the world have not sent their observers to the pseudo elections. And there were self-proclaimed observers who came to Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon said that pseudo elections on the 2nd of November became a serious violation of Minsk agreements and will not help the peaceful settlement of conflict in Ukraine. John Kerry, the US State Secretary, emphasized that the official Washington does not regard pseudo elections in Donbass as legitimate, and the statements of Russia about their support go beyond the framework of the Minsk agreements. Besides, the official representative of the National Security Council of the USA, Mark Strock, said the US advised Russia to abstain from using the results of elections in the DNR and LNR as a pretext for the introduction of additional personnel and machinery into Ukraine. Torbjörn Jagland, the General Secretary of the Council of Europe, and Elmar Brok, head of the Committee of Europe Parliament, and Federica Mogherini, the High Commissioner of US in Foreign Affairs, called those pseudo-elections non-legitimate and also said that they do not correspond to the Minsk agreements. Head of the German Foreign Ministry Frank-Walter Steinmeier emphasized that Russia has to abstain from statements about recognition of the so-called elections occupied on the territories occupied by the so-called DNR and LNR, because they can be assessed by the terrorists as the stimulation to separate from Ukraine. Also, the pseudo-elections were condemned by the leaders and foreign affairs ministries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. The situation in the anti-terrorist operation zone had two trends last day. The activity of terrorists who continue to violate the regime of the ceasefire has fallen down a bit. The number and intensity of firing at the positions of Ukrainian military has decreased. Praise to God, not a single Ukrainian military was killed or was wounded last day, but at the same time, the intensive movement of military machinery and personnel from the territory of Russian Federation to territory temporarily controlled by the militants does not cease, and the presence of Russian troops is not even disguised. The biggest activity was observed in the region of Donetsk airport that was shelled upon by mortars, and also in Stanichne, Luhansk, Slovenosersk, and Popasna districts of Luhansk region. In Frunze, the settlement of Frunze in Luhansk region, the terrorists fired from Grad batteries, grenade launchers, and small firearms at the road checkpoint number 31. Our artillery fired back in response. The situation remains difficult. I have to explain that the road checkpoint number 31 is the classic road checkpoint, not just a fortification that stands on the road. It is reinforced with machinery and personnel, and it is under our constant attention now. Next to the settlement Staraya Dar in Luhansk region, the militants have 4 times fired from mortars, grenade launchers, anti-aircraft guns and rifles, small firearms, the positions of Ukrainian military. There were no combat clashes on the border beyond the boundaries of the anti-terrorist operation. Also, there were no facts of air reconnaissance by illegal armed formations. However, over the last week, the border guards have observed the use of 25 drones of the enemy. At the same time, over the last 24 hours, the use by the Russian military of 3 reconnaissance Su-24 planes over Azov, the Sea of Azov and Straits of Kerch was observed. Besides, the use of the Russian plane Il-20 was detected. It conducted radio-electronic reconnaissance. Yesterday, at the control point next to the settlement of Pisky, a car without license plates with 2 citizens of Russia was stopped. They turned out to be the military of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Because their military tickets were found at them, they were handed over to the Security Service of Ukraine. 1 tank and 1 armored vehicle were repaired over the last day, and the process of bestowing the status of the participant in combat actions is going on. At the moment, this status was received by more than 1,100 people. Yesterday, after the end of the pseudo-elections, the terrorists have again started to fire at residential blocks of flats, and in Luhansk region at 9:20 p.m., the militants of the so-called Donsky Cossacks have again shelled from artillery the settlement of Krymske. It was also fired upon from mortars, grad batteries, and artillery. As a result, several private houses and the and tuberculosis dispensary were damaged. It is situated on the outskirts of the settlement, and it's only 650 meters away from the nearest position of the terrorists. Today in the morning, the shelling of the firing at Krymske has renewed. At the moment, they are firing there from small firearms. Also, they fired from grad batteries at the town of Girske, and from mortars, the settlement of Chernukhino in Luhansk region, in Donetsk region, in the village of Pavlopil. As a result of firing from terrorists, 2 local residents were wounded. The gas pipeline was damaged, as well as the electricity line. And the Ukrainian special services and law enforcers have reinforced their anti-subversive actions in all the regions of Ukraine. Yesterday, the head of the security service informed about the detention in Kiev of 6 members of the especially dangerous subversive group. They all were detained in time. They were not able to commit the crimes that they planned. They all were former servicemen from the Ministry of Interior. They all were dismissed from the Ministry of Interior for actions that discredit their workers, and they were detained also because of the vigilance of ordinary Kievans. And when they were detained, a arsenal of arms was confiscated, including 4 submachine guns, 10 pistols, and a great number of rounds for them. So citizens of Ukraine, be vigilant, and if you see some suspicious persons, call the hotline of the security service 0800 501 482. Any questions, please?
What is known about the fifth Russian convoy that brought so-called humanitarian assistance to Donbass? We know that it illegally crossed the territory of Ukraine. We do not know what was in the convoy. and we don't have any data on that. There's a question from the end of the room. Could you please tell us in more detail about checkpoint number 31, about the ultimatum that the servicemen received? What is it about? Is there any deadline by which they have to surrender? And what will be the reaction? In the morning, there was the ultimatum sent to the servicemen of the checkpoint 31. After that, without waiting till the deadline expires, the terrorists shelled at the checkpoint from the mortar launchers. They, in detail, our artillery eliminated these places from where the shooting was going on. We don't have any other details. What was the deadline? But we don't have these details. About the Donetsk airport, what's the situation? There's information that the militants are controlling some of the terminals there. In Donetsk airport, there are just two terminals, the old one and the new one. All of them are under the control of Ukrainian army. And on the peaceful people who suffered within the 24 hours, all the officially confirmed data was given. If there are any other victims, we don't know about them. And again, there was information about Russian military that they are in Donetsk. We have the confirmation that there are Russian military in both Donetsk and Lugansk. Any other questions? There's information about four groups of militants who completed their groupings, and four of them, there are about 30,000 militants there, 15,000 Russian mercenaries, and they are sort of preparing a very powerful offense all over the territory of Ukraine. We don't have that data about the exact numbers of militants and the groups which are there. We know that there are not four groups, but several dozens of them. They are separated, and we cannot say that they are united. There are many Russian mercenaries, Russian servicemen who entered the territory, those who forcefully or by deceit were forced to take arms and fight against Ukrainians. We do have that information, but we do not know how many and where. We have some operative data, and according to that, we are preparing how to detain them. There is now the discussion about the statement made on Friday that the representatives of the republics have the nuclear warhead. Is that information reliable? We are not ready to confirm that information. We don't have any confirmation, but whatever is brought from Russian Federation is in the hands of the terrorists. So the only thing they could have received this nuclear warhead from Russia. We don't have any information that they do have this nuclear warhead. Another question. Sergei Kotnikov, well, yesterday in Mariupol at checkpoint at 7:30, when transporting the explosive, there was an explosion and 3 servicemen were wounded, as well as the driver. If you know that, please comment on that. And also the aircraft, Su-24 and others, do they enter the airspace of Ukraine? They have not violated the airspace of Ukraine, but if they do violate, do our forces have the order to eliminate them? If they go into the territory of Ukraine, they will be eliminated. The first question, we mentioned that yesterday there were not 3 wounded, 2 killed Ukrainian servicemen and 1 wounded, and we yesterday gave that information. Any other questions? Once you have no more questions, thank you. And the next press briefing of NSCD is tomorrow.